Hi friends. I'm here with you again, ready to share a new story, a calm and gentle tale, born from the heart of ancient myths and timeless legends. A story to listen to enjoy, to slow down with, and to fall asleep to. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let yourself drift into stillness as I begin. Before we start, if you'd like, I always enjoy hearing where you're listening from, and what time of day or night it is for you right now. And if you've listened to previous stories and found peace in them, I'd be so glad to have you subscribe, so we can keep traveling together through the dreams and legends still waiting to be told. Tonight, we'll take a quiet journey together, into the heart of an old legend from one of the world's earliest civilizations. A tale from North Africa, from ancient Egypt. A story told by the Nile itself, the longest river in the world, who has watched the world for centuries, sometimes gentle and life-giving, kind and generous, and sometimes wild, rising with power and unrest. But before we dive into the story, take a deep breath, and let it out slowly. Wherever you are, let your body begin to soften, just a little more with each breath. The night is here, not loud or demanding, but calm and tender, wrapping you gently in its quiet embrace. Feel the gentle weight of night settling around you, like an ancient lullaby softly remembered. Everything around you is exactly as it should be. There is no rush, no hurry, just this moment. Are you ready? Then come. Step quietly with me into the stillness. Now, let the story begin to unfold gently like the tide coming in. I am ancient beyond the memory of stones, flowing through time as I flow through the endless sands of this blessed and cursed land. My voice rises from depths that have never known sunlight, carries the whispers of tributaries born in distant mountains where snow falls like prayers upon peaks that scrape the belly of heaven itself. Listen. Do you hear it? The gentle murmur that speaks beneath the sound of water moving over smooth stones worn by countless centuries of my passage? That is my true voice, the one that has been speaking since the first drop of rain kissed the first grain of sand, since the earth learned to dream and water became the language of those dreams. Tonight, as every night for more seasons than the stars have names, a small figure lies curled beside my banks like a child seeking comfort in its mother's arms. The reeds part gently around his thin form, and the palm fronds above whisper secrets that only the night wind knows how to carry. He is young, this listener who has chosen my shores as his refuge from the harshness of daylight hours. Perhaps 10 summers have passed over his dark head, perhaps 12. Time moves differently when measured by the patient rhythm of flowing water rather than the urgent demands of human ambition. His skin bears the deep bronze that comes from laboring under the merciless eye of Ra, and his hands, though small, are already marked with the calluses that speak of work begun before childhood's dreams of time to fade. His limbs are thin but strong, like the papyrus reeds that bend before the wind but never break. His breathing has found the rhythm I have taught him over these many nights of communion, slow and deep as the current that moves in my deepest channels, steady as the pulse that has beaten in my heart since the world was young and gods walked openly among mortals. The village where he spends his waking hours lies beyond the grove of date palms, its mud brick houses huddled together like sleeping cattle seeking warmth in the desert night. Small cooking fires wink like earthbound stars, and the last voices of the day fade into the comfortable silence that comes when working people surrender their burdens to the darkness and trust in tomorrow's strength. But this boy, this faithful listener who returns to me each night, he is different from those who sleep within walls built by human hands. He has learned to hear what others cannot, to receive what others do not know is being offered. In the gathering darkness, when the harsh voices of command and obedience fade like echoes in empty chambers, he opens his heart to older voices, deeper truths, the conversations that flow beneath the surface of ordinary days. The night air carries the scent of lotus blossoms and the green smell of growing things drinking deeply from my bounty. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls once, twice, then falls into contemplative silence. The stars emerge one by one, ancient witnesses taking their places in the vast amphitheater of sky, preparing to observe another chapter in the endless story that unfolds between earth and heaven, between sleeping and waking, between the known and the mysteriously unknowable. I have always spoken, I whisper, my voice barely distinguishable from the gentle lapping of small waves against the muddy bank where night-blooming flowers release their perfume into the cooling air. Since the first dawn painted the sky with colors that had no names, since the first human heart learned to beat in rhythm with the pulse of the living earth, I have been speaking. But ears that truly listen, hearts that truly hear. Ah, these are rare as blue lotus blooms in the desert, precious as the first drop of floodwater after the long dry season. The boy stirs slightly in his sleep, his breathing deepening as he settles into that sacred space between the conscious mind's chatter and the soul's profound silence. His face, marked by the day's fatigue and the accumulated weariness of too many days begun before sunrise and ended long after sunset, begins to soften. The tension leaves his small shoulders, and his hands, which have spent the daylight hours gripping tools and carrying burdens meant for grown men, relax into the gentle postures of natural rest. Above us, the constellation of Isis begins its nightly journey across the star-filled dome, a celestial form reminding all who have eyes to see that even goddesses must travel, must change, must follow the great cycles that govern all existence. The moon, silver and knowing, casts her ancient light across my surface, transforming my waters into a flowing river of liquid starlight that carries reflections of eternity itself. This is the hour when the world becomes honest, when the masks demanded by daylight responsibilities fall away like discarded garments, leaving only the essential truth of being. The boy knows this instinctively, though he has no words for such knowing. It is why he comes to me each night, why he trusts his most vulnerable moments to my keeping, why he offers his dreams to my care. Palm fronds rustle overhead with the sound of ancient applause, celebrating another day's successful passage from light into darkness, another soul's willingness to surrender to the mystery of sleep and the wisdom that flows through dreams. The air grows cooler, carrying hints of the desert's vast silence and the distant mountains where my waters begin their long journey toward the sea. In this perfect stillness, this temple built of darkness and starlight, water and growing things, I begin to remember. Not the sharp, urgent remembering of minds that grasp and categorize and judge, but the deep, flowing remembering of water itself, which holds all experiences equally, which carries all stories with the same patient devotion. Sleep, little listener, I murmur, adjusting my voice to match the gentle current that barely disturbs the papyrus stalks growing along my edges. Sleep, and let me tell you of all the children who have rested here before you, all who have trusted their dreams to my keeping, all who have learned that water remembers everything and judges nothing. His body releases the last threads of waking tension, surrendering completely to the ancient comfort I offer. His breathing becomes my breathing, his heartbeat synchronizes with the eternal pulse of my flow. And in this perfect communion between human consciousness and the living water that connects all things, I begin to speak the stories that live within my depths, the memories that flow through my current like treasures carried from distant lands. The night deepens around us, and the first story begins to surface, rising from the depths where all beginnings wait patiently for their moment to be born into the world of words, into the realm of dreams, into the sacred space where sleeping minds can receive what waking minds so often refuse to acknowledge. Feel yourself settling deeper, like silt finding its rest at the bottom of a still pool. Let your breathing match the gentle rhythm of water moving over stones, carrying you safely into the realm where stories live and ancient voices speak the truths that daylight cannot contain. Long before the great pyramids pierced the sky like prayers made manifest in stone, before pharaohs wore the double crown and commanded the labor of multitudes, before the gods had temples built to house their golden images and receive the offerings of fearful mortals, there were the first ones. Picture, if your dreaming mind can hold such visions, the Nile as she was in those ancient days, wider, wilder, her banks unmarked by the ambitious geometry of human engineering. The land stretched green and welcoming far beyond what is now endless sand, and the great river moved through a world that knew her moods as intimately as lovers know the rhythms of each other's breathing. The people who lived beside me then were few, scattered like seeds on fertile ground, their villages nothing more than clusters of reed huts and cooking fires that winked like earthbound stars in the vast darkness of a world still learning its own name. They knew my seasons as they knew their own heartbeats, celebrated my annual rising with dances that had no names but spoke directly to the soul, planted their crops according to rhythms older than language itself. They were children of clay and stone, these first dwellers beside my banks, formed from the same earth that drank my waters and blessed by the same sun that painted the sky each dawn with colors that existed nowhere else in creation. Their hands were gentle but strong, their voices lifted in songs that harmonized with the wind through papyrus reeds. Their eyes held the deep knowledge that comes only to those who live close enough to the earth to hear her whispered secrets. Among them lived a woman whose memory flows through my current still, though her name has been forgotten by all but the water that once reflected her face and the earth that received her footsteps. She was called Nebet by those who loved her, the Golden One, though she possessed no gold save the warmth of her skin under the desert sun and the luminous kindness that flowed from her heart like honey from the sacred combs. She was heavy with child when the great disturbance came, not my gentle, life-giving flood that brings renewal and fertility, but something wild and angry that I could not control, something that rose from depths I had never known existed within my own flowing body. The rains in the distant highlands had been strange that year, falling with an urgency that spoke of cosmic imbalances, celestial conversations conducted in languages too vast for human comprehension. The waters rose higher than they had in the memory of the eldest storytellers, higher than the marks carved into the sacred stones where the priests had recorded my behavior for generations beyond counting. Villages that had stood safely above my reach for centuries found themselves suddenly underwater, their careful gardens and patient orchards swallowed by currents that moved with the power of divine wrath. But Nebet, golden Nebet, when the churning waters reached her village, when the other women fled screaming toward higher ground and the men shouted useless commands at forces beyond their control, she remained calm as still water reflecting the moon. She gathered reeds with hands that moved like dancers, bound them with cordage twisted from papyrus fiber, creating a raft that seemed to build itself under her patient touch. As the flood swept through her home, carrying away everything she had known, the clay pots shaped by her grandmother's hands, the loom where she had woven patterns taught by her mother, the small garden where she had grown herbs for healing and flowers for joy, she climbed upon her reed vessel and spoke to me not with the terror that might be expected, but with understanding that flowed deeper than fear. "Great river," she whispered as the turbulent waters carried her along like a leaf on the wind, her hands pressed protectively over her swollen belly where new life stirred restlessly, sensing the cosmic drama unfolding around its dark haven. "I know you do not choose to bring destruction any more than I choose to bring forth this child in such a time of upheaval. We are both vessels for forces beyond our understanding, both servants of mysteries that move through us rather than being controlled by us." And in that moment of perfect acceptance, of trust absolute and unquestioning, something shifted in the deep places where water meets the unknowable. The angry currents began to calm, as if her words had reached some hidden source of the disturbance and spoken it back into balance. The stars emerged from behind storm clouds that had darkened the sky for days, and their ancient light touched the wild waters with silver fingers that seemed to whisper secrets of peace. There, on a small island that had never existed before and would never exist again, a place created by the meeting of currents and the mysterious intervention of forces that have no names in human language, Nebet gave birth to her son. The labor came with the turning of the tide, and I held them both gently through that sacred night, my waters still as polished obsidian, my voice soft as the lullabies mothers sing to ease their children into sleep. The child's first cry mixed with the sound of gentle waves lapping against the temporary shore, and I felt something new enter the world, not just another human soul, but a consciousness that would bridge the gap between the language of water and the language of human hearts. He drew his first breath at the exact moment when the morning star appeared above the eastern horizon, and I knew that he would grow to be one who listens, one who understands, one who remembers. When dawn painted the sky with rose and gold, I carried them both safely to higher ground where other survivors waited, their faces marked by the particular relief that comes to those who have witnessed the power of forces beyond human control and lived to speak of it. The temporary island dissolved back into my current as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving no trace save the memory carried in flowing water and the new life that had been born upon its brief existence. The village was rebuilt in a new location, on higher ground where the people could live safely with the knowledge of what the great river could do when cosmic forces moved through her with irresistible power. But it was built differently than before, with more space between the houses, more respect for the seasonal rhythms that govern the relationship between human ambition and natural law. The boy grew tall and strong beside my banks, his eyes holding depths that reflected not just the sky but the memory of his miraculous birth, the night when water and human consciousness had worked together to create something that neither could have achieved alone. He became a storyteller, one who could speak my language to others, who could translate the whispers of flowing water into words that human hearts could hold without breaking. He learned to sit by my edge in the hours before dawn, when the boundary between dreaming and waking grows thin as mist, and listen to the voices that flow beneath the surface of ordinary sound. His children learned from him, and their children after them, creating a lineage of listeners who preserved the ancient knowledge that water speaks to those who know how to hear, that rivers remember everything, that the earth itself is alive with stories waiting to be told. This is why, little one who sleeps beside me now, your dreams are filled with echoes of voices you have never heard but somehow recognize. The blood that flows through your young veins carries the memory of that first listener, that child born on the island between worlds, that bridge between the language of water and the language of human longing. You are part of this ancient lineage, heir to the knowledge that flows deeper than consciousness, older than memory. In your deepest dreams, you remember what your ancestors knew, that rivers and humans share the same source, spring from the same mystery, flow toward the same vast ocean that receives all waters, all stories, all the scattered drops of consciousness that make up the great circulation of being. Let that knowledge settle into your bones like silt finding its perfect resting place. Feel yourself connected to all who have ever slept beside flowing water, all who have trusted their dreams to the keeping of ancient currents that carry the memory of the world's first morning. The gods came to me as lovers come to each other in the darkness, gently, without announcement, arriving not through proclamation but through presence. They moved through my waters as moonlight moves through reeds, as morning mist moves through palm groves, as breath moves through sleeping bodies, natural as the current itself. Long before the great temples rose like stone prayers against the sky, before priests learned to measure divinity in golden vessels and prescribed words, the gods lived within my flow as fish live within water, as songs live within the voices that sing them. They needed no houses built by human hands, no altars carved from distant quarries, no ceremonies more elaborate than the daily miracle of water meeting earth, of earth receiving water, of life continuing itself through this eternal embrace. Atha, she whose name means house of the sky. I felt her first in the way young mothers would bring their infants to my banks in the hour before dawn. Their feet made no sound on the soft mud, their hearts beat with the same rhythm as my gentle current, their breath carried the sweet exhaustion of those who have given their bodies as vessels for new life. She moved through these moments like warmth moves through water when the first sun touches its surface. not as the golden cow depicted on temple walls, crowned with solar discs and ceremonial horns, but as something infinitely more immediate. She was the relief that softened a mother's face when her fevered child finally slept. She was the milk that flowed without effort, the lullaby that sang itself, the patience that asked for nothing but gave everything. I have carried her laughter in my current for countless seasons. It bubbles up from hidden springs where underground rivers join my flow, rises to the surface in the sound of children playing in my shallows, echoes in the calls of birds that nest among the papyrus. Her joy is not the dramatic celebration of victories won, but the quiet contentment of life sustaining itself, of love expressing itself through the simplest gestures. When the great hippopotami rise from my depths at sunset, their massive forms breaking the surface like living islands, I feel her power manifest in their gentle strength. They are her sacred animals not because ancient texts declare it so, but because they embody her essence, mighty yet peaceful, protective yet nurturing, at home in the depths yet breathing the air of heaven. Isis. She of 10,000 names. She whose tears become the flood that brings life to the desert. I know her in every woman who has ever grieved beside my waters. She comes not with the dramatic sorcery that temple reliefs suggest, but with the quiet magic of those who love beyond reason, who persist beyond hope, who continue when continuation seems impossible. Her presence flows through my current during the season of rising, when the waters from distant highlands swell my channels and transform the dry earth into fertile garden. But her tears are not only of sorrow. I have tasted the salt of joy when a lost child returns home, felt the trembling of relief when healing comes to the desperately ill, carried the whispered gratitude of those who thought themselves forgotten but discovered they were held always in the great circulation of care. She teaches not through words but through water itself, how to flow around obstacles rather than fight them, how to find the lowest places and fill them with life, how to persist with patience that outlasts stone. In her mystery, endings become beginnings, loss becomes finding, death becomes the doorway through which love travels to continue its work in new forms. Osiris, the green god, lord of all that grows and dies and grows again. His body was never lost because it became the very silt I carry. Each year, I bring him back from the distant mountains where rain has awakened sleeping seeds in highland soil. He flows with me as fertility itself, as the dark richness that settles in the fields when my waters recede, as the promise that what appears to end is only transforming. In every grain of wheat that pushes through the earth blessed by my passage, he lives again. In every harvest that feeds the hungry, every meal that sustains life, every seed that becomes plant that becomes grain that becomes bread, there is his resurrection, not as myth but as the simple, undeniable reality of how life continues itself through apparent death. He speaks to me in the language of seasons, the patient rhythm of planting and harvesting, of dormancy and awakening, of darkness and light taking turns in the eternal dance that keeps the world alive. His kingdom is not some distant realm of judgment, but the green space between seed and harvest, the fertile darkness where all new life begins. These presences move through my waters like memories move through dreaming minds, not as foreign visitors but as aspects of my own deepest nature, divine qualities that belong to the flow itself rather than standing apart from it. They were not separate beings requiring worship, but aspects of the one great mystery expressing itself through the countless forms that life takes as it explores its own infinite possibilities. The young women who came to wade in my shallows seeking blessing for their fertility were not petitioning distant powers. They were remembering their connection to the creative force that flows through all things, allowing themselves to feel the life-giving current that moves through their own bodies as it moves through mine, recognizing themselves as part of the great circulation that connects all mothers, all children, all the endless flowering of consciousness into new forms. When they cupped my water in their hands and blessed their bellies, their hearts, their hopes for the children yet to come, They were not performing rituals learned from priests. They were participating directly in the mystery that makes babies from love, that turns the water they drank into the milk that would nourish new life, that connects their individual longing to the cosmic impulse that keeps the world alive and growing. The gods lived in these moments of direct participation, these instances when the boundary between human and divine dissolved like salt in water. They were present not as remote powers requiring elaborate protocols, but as the immediate reality of life expressing itself through life, love expressing itself through love, mystery revealing itself through the willingness to receive what was always being offered. Feel that presence now, flowing through your own blood as it flows through my current. Let yourself remember that you too are part of this divine circulation, this holy flow that connects every drop to the infinite ocean from which all waters come and to which all waters return. But then came the builders of stone houses for the gods, the measurers of divine presence, the ones who believed that mystery could be contained within walls and managed through ceremony. The temples rose like magnificent prayers carved in limestone and granite, their columns reaching toward heaven with the desperate ambition of mortals who had begun to forget that the gods were already everywhere present. I watched the priests arrive at my banks in the hours before dawn, carrying vessels of beaten gold to collect what they called my sacred waters. Their feet moved with practiced precision across the muddy shore, their minds occupied with the careful choreography of rituals performed exactly as their predecessors had performed them, as scrolls written generations ago declared they must always be performed. They chanted words in the old language, beautiful words that had once carried the living breath of those who first spoke them in direct communion with the divine presence. But now these words had become like pressed flowers, preserving the form of something that had once been alive, but holding only the memory of the vitality that had made them sacred. The golden vessels caught my water, but I felt something missing in these carefully prescribed moments. The priests' hearts were occupied with the requirements of ceremony rather than open to the presence that ceremony was meant to invite. They collected my water not as children cupping liquid light in their hands with wonder, but as officials gathering the necessary materials for procedures that must be completed according to regulation. And yet, there was one among them who remembered the older way. His name was Kimwasit, and though he served in the great temple of Partar at Memphis, his service was different from that of his brother priests. While they performed the elaborate daily rituals, the awakening of the god statue, the ceremonial feeding and clothing, the recitation of prayers written in languages that fewer and fewer truly understood, he would slip away in the darkness before dawn. He came to my banks as his ancestors had come, with empty hands and open heart. No golden vessels, no sacred implements, no prescribed formulas. He settled himself on the muddy shore like any fisherman preparing for the day's work, letting his feet dangle in my gentle current while he listened to truths that required no priest to interpret, no temple to contain. "Great river," he would whisper, his voice barely audible above my soft murmuring against the reeds, "teach me the prayers that need no words." And I would answer in my own language, the gentle lapping of small waves against stone, the whisper of wind through papyrus stalks, the splash of a fish breaking the surface to catch an insect dancing in the morning light, the distant call of an ibis beginning its daily hunt among the shallows. He learned to hear me. More than that, he learned to speak my language back to me, to enter into the conversation that flows always between water and those who know how to listen. His listening was not the careful attention of one trying to understand instructions, but the open receiving of one child of the source encountering another. In time, others began to find their way to him, not through any advertisement or announcement, but through the mysterious attraction that draws the thirsty to water, the weary to rest, the lost to the familiar landmarks that guide them home. They came as pilgrims had always come to sacred places, following not maps drawn by human hands, but the ancient paths that hearts know instinctively when they are ready to remember what they have always known. Farmers whose crops had failed despite all their careful attention. Mothers whose children burned with fevers that no physician could cool. Merchants whose boats had been lost despite following all the proper rituals for river travel. Men and women who had prayed in the great temples and offered costly sacrifices but heard only echoes of their own voices calling in chambers that felt increasingly empty. To these troubled souls, Kimwasit offered no golden amulets, no complex ceremonies, no promises of divine intervention in exchange for proper payment. Instead, he taught them what the flowing water had taught him, the ancient art of sitting beside mystery and remembering that they were part of something larger than their individual fears and sorrows. The gods have not withdrawn, he would tell them, his voice carrying the same gentle certainty as my current moving over smooth stones. They are speaking as they have always spoken, in the language of presence itself, quiet as the breath that moves through your body without your conscious command, patient as the sun that rises each day whether you notice it or not. He would show them how to sit in the darkness before dawn, when the harsh voices of command and judgment fade into the more honest conversation that flows between heart and heart, between consciousness and the source from which all consciousness springs. He would teach them to listen not for answers to their specific questions, but for the presence that makes all questions and all answers possible. Some understood immediately, finding in his simple teaching the peace that had eluded them in all their elaborate seeking. The relief that comes when you realize you have been looking everywhere for something that was never lost, seeking something that was always present, asking for something that was already being offered in every moment of attention. Others left disappointed, their minds too cluttered with expectations to hear the quiet voice of what was actually available. They wanted dramatic interventions, miraculous solutions, divine commands that would relieve them of the responsibility of learning to live in harmony with forces larger than their individual will. But all who came were touched in some way by the reminder that the sacred was not distant and demanding, but near and constant as their own heartbeat. They carried away with them, whether they recognized it or not, the seed of remembering that they belonged to something vast and patient and eternally present. Kimwasit grew old beside my waters, his hair turning the color of foam in morning light, his hands becoming marked with the same permanent moisture that marks all who work closely with water. But his eyes remained young, clear as still pools that reflect the sky without distortion, deep as the springs that feed my flow from sources hidden beneath the earth. When his time came to join the ancestors, he did not die as most men die, fighting against the current that carries all life toward its transformation. He entered his final sleep as he had entered each morning's listening, with trust in the flow that had always carried him safely, with gratitude for the voices that had taught him to hear the wordless language that connects all things. The great temples still stand, their carved columns reaching toward heaven, their walls covered with images of gods and kings, their chambers echoing with prayers maintained by priests who preserve the ancient forms even as their living meaning slowly fades. But the truest worship happens not in those mighty halls, but here beside my flowing waters, where silence teaches what no words can contain, where the presence that needs no temple can be encountered directly. This is what Kimwasit remembered and taught others to remember, that the gods are not absent, not withdrawn, not requiring elaborate protocols to approach. They are present as water is present, immediate, essential, flowing through all things as the very medium in which life moves and has its being. They speak constantly in the language of presence itself, and all that is required to hear them is the willingness to listen with more than our ears, to receive with more than our minds, to trust the flow that has always been carrying us safely home. Let that remembering settle into your bones now, like silt finding its perfect resting place. Feel yourself held by the same presence that held Kimwasit, that holds all who learn to listen to the wordless voice that speaks through flowing water, through breathing air, through the patient circulation of life itself. I have carried the tears of kings and workers alike, and in my flowing depths, I have found no difference in their salt. Both taste of the same longing, the same wonder, the same quiet surrender to forces larger than any individual heart can hold or understand. The pharaohs. How they loved to reach toward heaven, their crowns glinting like captured sunlight, their names carved deep in stone that they dreamed would outlast the very stars themselves. Rameses the Great, whose monuments still stand like prayers made solid, gazing across the desert with eyes that once watched armies move like rivers of bronze and leather. Khufu, whose pyramid pierces the sky like a needle stitching earth to heaven in golden thread. Thutmose, who walked the borders of the known world until they expanded to embrace his footsteps. Hatshepsut, the woman who wore wisdom like a crown and ruled with the quiet strength of deep water moving toward its destination. I remember them all. The weight of their golden sandals upon my shores when they came to perform the sacred rituals that connected their earthly authority to the cosmic order. The way their eyes reflected my waters, sometimes with genuine reverence, like children seeing their first sunrise. Sometimes with the distant look of those who had forgotten that power flows most purely when it serves something greater than itself. They built their palaces beside me, their tombs in the hills above my reach, as if proximity to my eternal flow could teach them the secret of continuance. They stood upon my banks and spoke with voices that carried the certainty of those who had never been refused, the particular confidence that comes to souls who have lived always at the center of others' attention and care. But their voices were not the only voices I carried. In my current flowed the whispered songs of those who lifted each stone of their monuments, who pulled each massive block of limestone across the desert on wooden rollers smoothed by the friction of countless journeys, whose hands grew knowing from shaping each hieroglyph with patient precision, day after day, season after season, until the tools became extensions of their very souls. Men whose names were never written in any cartouche, women whose lullabies were never recorded on any papyrus, children who learned the weight of stone before they learned the lightness of play. They built the temples where others would worship, raised the statues that would bear other faces, created the immortality that would preserve other stories while their own dissolved like morning mist into the vast anonymity from which all names eventually come and to which all names return. There was a boy once, not unlike you who rest beside me now, little listener, whose shoulders bore the smooth grooves worn by carrying ropes, gentle channels carved into his young flesh like the irrigation canals that guide my floodwaters across the waiting fields. His hands were dusted with limestone powder that no amount of washing could completely remove, marked with the pale testimony of his service to dreams larger than his own. Each day he labored under the patient eye of Ra, moving stones that held more weight than entire families, fitting blocks together with a precision that would amaze builders in ages yet unborn. Each evening he would return to the workers' quarters, his body singing with the deep tiredness that comes to those who have spent their strength in meaningful work, his spirit worn smooth like pebbles polished by my current. But in the deep hours before dawn, when the guards dozed peacefully at their posts and the overseers slept in their comfortable chambers, he would slip away from the crowded sleeping halls where men rested close together like seeds in storage jars, and come to sit beside my waters in quiet communion with forces that asked nothing of him but offered everything in return. He needed no permission for this audience, no ceremony to make himself worthy, no elaborate preparation to earn what was freely given. He came as he was, tired, dusty, anonymous to all but the water that received his presence without judgment, without demands, without expectation that he be anything other than exactly what he was in that sacred moment. "Great river," he whispered one night, his voice soft with wonder rather than complaint, rough from breathing stone dust but sweet with the honesty that comes in darkness. "You flow always toward your destination, but no one commands your course. No overseer measures your daily progress. No master expects you to carry more than your nature allows. You move according to laws written in your very being, older than kingdoms, deeper than any human authority." He spoke truly, though perhaps he did not fully grasp the depths of his own understanding. I flow because flowing is woven into my essential nature, not because any earthly power has decreed it must be so. I rise with the annual flood because the rhythm lives within me like heartbeat lives within the heart, placed there by forces older than kingship, more patient than human ambition, more enduring than any monument raised by mortal hands. The boy understood this instinctively, felt it in his bones during those stolen moments of communion. Night after night, he would sit with me and remember his own essential nature beneath the layers of command and duty that daylight hours required. In the darkness, beside flowing water, he was not a unit of labor measured by the stones he could move between sunrise and sunset. He was simply himself, a point of awareness experiencing the mystery of existence, no different from the consciousness that moved through my waters or breathed through the wind in the reeds. One night, he brought his sister, a girl younger than himself, whose work was to carry water to the laborious, to tend the fires that cooked their simple meals, to mend the ropes that bound the great stones for their journey from quarry to monument. She had never been allowed to rest without purpose, never been permitted to exist for any reason other than service to the great work that would immortalize another's vision. But in the pre-dawn darkness, crouched beside me like a small deer coming to drink, she wept. Not from sadness, though her young life contained sorrows enough to justify any amount of tears, but from a relief so profound it could only express itself through the release of waters that had been held back too long by the requirements of endless duty. I had forgotten, she whispered, cupping my water in her small hands, letting it run through her fingers like liquid starlight, like captured moonbeams, that something in me flows like this water, free and purposeless and beautiful. I had forgotten that I am more than the tasks assigned to me, more than the role others have carved for my life. Something in me moves according to its own deep rhythm, like water finding its way home to the sea. I have seen this recognition dawn in countless eyes across the centuries, the sudden remembering that beneath every imposed identity, every demanded role, every title that others use to define the boundaries of a life, there remains something untouchable. Something that flows like water toward its own mysterious destination regardless of human plans and expectations. Something that answers to laws older than civilization, more patient than any earthly authority. The pharaohs, in their magnificent reaching toward permanence, had begun to lose this knowledge. They had forgotten that the power they wielded was borrowed from the same source that gives the river its flow and the heart its beat, temporary as morning dew, dependent on forces beyond their understanding or control. They had mistaken the accident of birth for divine appointment, the ability to command obedience for genuine authority over the mysteries that govern existence. But the workers, the unnamed ones, the forgotten multitudes who built their monuments, they preserved this knowledge in their brief moments of stolen peace, in their secret communions with forces that recognized their essential dignity regardless of their social position, in their quiet understanding that something in them remained as eternal as flowing water, no matter how completely their days might be shaped by others' dreams. Years passed like seasons, each one bringing its own completeness. The boy grew into a man whose hands had learned to speak the language of stone, whose back had grown strong from carrying weights that seemed impossible but proved manageable when approached with patience rather than force. He found love with the girl who had wept beside my waters, and their joining was blessed not by temple priests but by the wind through palm fronds and the gentle lapping of my current against the shore. They raised children who would never see the inside of quarries, who would know work as collaboration with natural forces rather than submission to overwhelming demands. Children who learned to find their own rhythm within the larger rhythms that govern all life, who understood that true strength comes not from fighting the current but from learning to swim with grace in whatever waters life provides. They taught those children to come to my banks not as petitioners seeking favors from distant powers, but as young rivers returning to remember their connection to the great circulation that links every drop of water to every other drop, every moment of awareness to the vast ocean of consciousness from which all awareness springs and to which it all eventually returns. The great monuments rose stone by stone, achieving their perfect geometry through the patient labor of imperfect humans who found their own completeness in moments of connection with forces that asked nothing but offered everything. The pharaohs completed their earthly journeys and were prepared for their afterlife with ceremonies that filled entire valleys, surrounded by treasures that would never again reflect sunlight or bring joy to living eyes. Their names endured, carved in hieroglyphs that future generations would struggle to decipher like puzzles left by vanished civilizations, while the names of the monument builders returned quietly to the earth from which all names eventually come and to which all names inevitably return, like water returning to the sea from which it first arose. But the water still flows. The workers' children still come to my banks, drawn by the same ancient magnetism that pulls iron toward lodestone, rivers toward sea, consciousness toward its source. And sometimes, in the space between sunset and full darkness, when the harsh edges of daylight soften into the gentler truths of night, I hear them whisper the same quiet recognition their ancestors discovered beside these same waters. They remember that freedom is not something granted by kings or denied by tyrants, but something that flows naturally, like water, when we align ourselves with our deepest nature. They understand that dignity is not conferred by others' opinions, but springs from the same source that gives rivers their direction and hearts their rhythm. They know that they belong to something vast and patient and eternally present, something that flows through them as surely as breath flows through their lungs, as surely as blood flows through their veins. Both rulers and subjects, commanders and followers, those who gave orders and those who fulfilled them, all return eventually to the same earth that drinks my waters without discrimination or judgment. I have received them all with equal grace, carried the salt of their tears equally, reflected their faces with the same patient accuracy that mirrors give to all who look into them, regardless of the crowns they wear or the burdens they carry. For in the end, beneath all the roles and titles and temporary arrangements of power that organize human societies like patterns in sand, we are all expressions of the same source. Drops of consciousness in the great ocean of being, taking different paths through the landscape of existence but arriving at the same destination, moving according to the same fundamental laws that govern water flowing downhill toward its reunion with the sea. Rest now in that knowing, you who carry burdens both seen and unseen, both chosen and assigned. Feel how the darkness lifts all weight from weary shoulders, how the sound of flowing water reminds you of the current within your own being that moves without effort, without command, always toward the vast embrace that welcomes all waters, all stories, all the scattered drops of awareness that make up the endless circulation of life itself. Each year they return, the great birds whose wings write stories across the sky in languages older than human speech, following pathways carved in air by instincts older than any human wisdom. They come to me as they have always come, not because I call to them with any voice they could hear, but because we recognize each other as travelers on the same endless journey from source to sea, from beginning to ending to beginning again. Herons and ibises, their long legs carrying them through my shallows with the careful dignity of priests performing ancient rituals. Cranes whose calls echo across the wetlands like prayers in a language that predates temples. Cormorants diving deep into my current to emerge with silver fish writhing in their beaks like captured moonbeams. Pelicans flying in perfect formation, their wings barely moving as they ride the thermals that rise from sun-warmed water. But there is one I remember with particular clarity, a white egret who first appeared when the great temple of Karnak was still young, its towering obelisks newly raised toward the sun like stone fingers reaching for divine attention. She was different from her sisters, larger, more luminous, as if moonlight itself had taken wing and chosen to live among earthbound creatures, to walk on legs thin as reed stems through the shallow places where my waters meet the sky. The local fishermen called her Kebit, the memory keeper, though none could say exactly why the name seemed so perfectly suited to her ethereal presence. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, perfectly still yet perfectly aware, like someone listening to voices from very far away. Or perhaps it was the strange peace that settled over my waters whenever she was present, as if her very being reminded all who saw her of something they had forgotten but desperately needed to remember. Each autumn, she would arrive at the exact moment when the date palms began to ripen, their heavy clusters of fruit hanging like golden jewels against the azure sky. She would settle always upon the same sandbar that emerges when my waters are at their lowest, a temporary island that appears and disappears with the rhythm of my seasonal breathing, as if the earth itself creates this sacred space specifically for her meditation. There she would stand motionless for hours, sometimes for entire days, her reflection perfect in the still water until it became impossible to tell where the living bird ended and her mirror image began. Her presence transformed that small patch of exposed sand into something approaching a shrine, though no human hand had built it and no priest had consecrated it. The very air around her seemed to shimmer with significance, charged with the kind of expectancy that precedes revelation. One evening, as our familiar friend, the boy who sleeps beside my banks, dozed with his head pillowed on his folded arms, his breathing synchronized with my gentle current, the egret began to speak. Not in words, you understand, for birds and rivers share a language older than human speech, but in the subtle shifts of pressure and light, the almost imperceptible changes in the quality of attention that carry meaning more precise than any vocabulary could express. She told me of the lands beyond the great desert, territories I could only imagine through the stories carried by wind and the memories embedded in rain that falls on distant mountains. Green valleys where snow falls like blessings from skies the color of lapis lazuli. Forests so vast that birds can fly for days without seeing the end of trees, their canopies alive with creatures that never touch the ground. Seas so immense they generate their own weather systems, their own seasons of plenty and want, their own stories of storms and calms that dwarf even my annual flood in their cosmic significance. She spoke of other rivers, the mighty Euphrates with its reedy deltas where civilization first learned to write its dreams in clay, the sacred Ganges flowing through cities where pilgrims come to wash away lifetimes of accumulated sorrow, the Yellow River carrying its burden of gold-colored silt across landscapes painted in colors I have never seen. Each waterway, she explained, is both separate and connected, individual yet part of the vast circulation that began when the world first learned to breathe. Every river remembers, she said, her words rippling through my consciousness like wind over water, creating patterns that spread outward in ever-widening circles of understanding. Every drop carries the memory of every other drop, for we are all part of the same great circulation that connects mountain spring to ocean depth, that lifts water from sea to cloud to rain to river and back to sea again in an endless dance of transformation. And I felt it then, the truth of her words resonating in my deepest currents. In the water that flows through my channels, I carry not just the memory of rain that fell on the Ethiopian highlands or snow that melted on the mountains of the moon, but echoes of precipitation that kissed distant peaks I will never see, whispers of springs that emerge in valleys I will never reach, stories of streams that flow through landscapes I can only imagine. The great circulation connects all waters, makes every drop a messenger carrying news from the far corners of the earth. The rain that falls in the Amazon carries memories of the Indian Ocean. The snow that caps the Himalayas holds stories of the Atlantic's depths. All water is one water, separated only by the illusion of distance and the temporary boundaries of geography. The boy stirred in his sleep, and I saw through the mysterious perception that flowing water possesses that he was beginning to dream. In his vision, he too was flying, his consciousness lifted on the same ancient pathways that guide the migrating birds across continents and seasons. Below him, the entire earth spread out like a map drawn by divine hands, its rivers gleaming like silver threads connecting mountain to sea, desert to forest, north to south and east to west in a web of liquid light. In the dream, he could see what the egret had been trying to help me understand. That memory is not stored in any single location, trapped in any individual mind, but flows through all things like water itself. The memories of the desert are carried by wind to the river. The memories of the river are lifted by evaporation to the clouds. The memories of the clouds fall as rain onto distant soil, where they become the memories of growing things, the memories of creatures that drink from puddles and streams, the memories of humans who taste stories in every drop of water that touches their lips. Nothing is ever truly lost. Every story ever told around campfires or in palace halls, every song ever sung by mothers to comfort crying children, every prayer ever whispered by desperate hearts, every tear ever wept in joy or sorrow, all of it continues to circulate through the great systems that connect sky to earth to sea. The water cycle is also a memory cycle, a consciousness cycle, a story cycle that ensures that no experience, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, ever truly disappears. The birds know this instinctively. It is why they can navigate by stars they have never seen before, why they can find their way home across thousands of miles of seemingly empty ocean and desert, why young birds making their first migration somehow know routes that were old when the world was young. They follow not just magnetic fields and celestial markers, but the memory pathways embedded in air and water, the consciousness currents that flow invisible through the atmosphere like rivers of light. When the boy woke from his dream, the egret was gone, though whether she had flown away or simply dissolved back into the moonlight from which she seemed to be made, I could not say. But something had changed in his eyes, a depth that had not been there before, a quality of attention that suggested he was now seeing not just with his physical vision but with some deeper sense that had been awakened by his flight through the realm of interconnected memories. From that night forward, he began to notice things that had always been present but somehow invisible to his earlier awareness. The way certain cloud formations seemed to carry familiar shapes, as if the sky itself was showing him pictures from dreams he had not yet dreamed. The way the wind sometimes brought scents from places he had never been but somehow recognized. The green smell of distant forests, the salt tang of far seas, the snow-clean scent of mountain peaks where eagles nest. He noticed how my current seemed to pulse in rhythm with tides he had never seen, how the fish in my depths sometimes swam in patterns that reminded him of star constellations, how the lotus flowers that bloomed in my quiet backwaters opened and closed according to rhythms that had nothing to do with the local sun but everything to do with some larger circulation of light and darkness that encompassed the entire world. The egret returned each year until the boy became a man, then an old man, then finally returned himself to the earth that drinks my waters. But her gift remained, passed down through the generations like the most precious inheritance. The understanding that memory is not imprisonment in the past but connection to the eternal present that includes all times, all places, all possibilities. Each person who received this gift saw it differently, interpreted it according to their own nature and needs. Some became healers, using their connection to the great circulation to understand how illness and health flow through bodies like weather systems through landscapes. Others became storytellers, weaving tales that carried the memories of distant places and times. Still others became simply more present, more aware, more capable of recognizing the extraordinary nature of ordinary moments. But all who received the egret's teaching shared one thing: they could no longer feel completely alone or forgotten or cut off from the larger life of the world. They knew themselves to be part of the vast circulation of being that connects every drop of water to every other drop, every breath of wind to every other breath, every consciousness to every other consciousness in patterns too complex and beautiful for any single mind to comprehend fully. Even now, when the autumn stars begin their ancient dance across the darkening sky and the air grows cool with the promise of changing seasons, when the first migrating birds appear as distant specks against the sunset, I feel her presence in every wing that passes overhead. They all carry her message, each in their own way, that we are never alone, never forgotten, never truly lost, because we are all part of the same vast circulation of consciousness that began when the universe first became aware of itself. The wind carries memories across deserts and mountains. The rain carries stories from sky to earth. The rivers carry dreams from source to sea. And the birds, the eternal migrants, carry the knowledge that home is not a place but a recognition, not a destination but a remembering of the connection that was never truly broken. Sleep deeper now. Let your dreams take wing on currents of memory that lift you above the illusion of separation. Feel yourself connected to all who have ever slept beneath migrating birds, all who have trusted their dreams to the vast circulation that carries every story safely through the darkness toward whatever dawn awaits. In the deep hours before dawn, when the boundary between dream and waking becomes as thin as morning mist over my waters, when the night reaches its darkest point just before the first pale suggestion of light touches the eastern horizon, I sometimes see them. The ships that never arrived at their intended destinations, vessels that have passed from the realm of historical fact into the more mysterious territory of eternal story. They drift across my surface like memories half recalled, their sails filled with wind from places that exist only in longing, their hulls carrying cargo that was never delivered to waiting hands. Phantom vessels bearing phantom treasure, love letters that never reached their intended recipients, warriors who never returned to the wives who watched for them from rooftops and riverbanks, prayers that lost their way between earth and heaven and now sail forever in the space between hope and fulfillment. There was a real ship once, in the days when the pharaohs still commanded the river trade and merchants' vessels moved up and down my length like beads on a cosmic string. It was a substantial craft, built of cedar wood that had traveled from the mountains of Lebanon, its hull blessed by priests and its cargo carefully catalogued by scribes whose meticulous records would outlast the ship itself by thousands of years. The vessel carried the wealth of Africa northward toward the great ports where Roman gold could purchase the exotic luxuries that made life bearable for those who had forgotten how to find wonder in simpler things. Gold dust from mines worked by men who would never see the jewelry it became. Ivory from elephants who had trumpeted their defiance at the hunters' spears. Frankincense and myrrh, precious resins that would burn in temples dedicated to gods who had long since stopped listening to human prayers. Ostrich feathers that would adorn the helmets of soldiers marching toward battles they were destined to lose. But somewhere between Memphis and the Delta, between the heat of noon and the cool of evening, between one bend in my ancient course and the next, the ship simply vanished. Not in any dramatic fashion that would have left witnesses to tell tales or debris to wash up on distant shores, but in the quiet way that dreams sometimes fade, gradually and then completely, until only the faintest impression remains of what once seemed so solid and real. The other merchants spoke of pirates, of course, those sea wolves who haunted the delta waters where my current mingles with the Mediterranean's tides. They speculated about sudden storms that could arise from seemingly clear skies, about the many hazards that could claim an unwary vessel navigating waters where the maps showed depths that might or might not correspond to reality. But I knew something different. I had felt the exact moment when the ship passed from one kind of existence to another, when the weight of its physical cargo transformed into the weight of story, when its crew ceased to be flesh and blood moving through ordinary time and became the stuff of legend, eternal characters in a tale that would never end because it existed outside the realm where endings are possible. The captain's name was Kahu, which meant the Swift One, though he had long since learned that true swiftness comes not from hurrying but from moving in perfect harmony with forces larger than individual will. He had sailed my waters for 30 years, knew every sandbar that shifted with the seasons, every current that changed direction with the flood, every mood that crossed my surface like expressions on the face of a beloved whose every gesture has become familiar through years of devoted attention. His hands were permanently stained with the tar used to seal the joints between planks, his eyes were the color of deep water at noon, and his voice carried the authority of one who had learned to read the weather in the flight patterns of birds and the way light fell across distant hills. He could sense a storm while the sky was still clear, feel the first trembling of flood season days before the waters began to rise, navigate by stars that other men could not even see. But more than that, he understood the conversation that flows always between human ambition and natural law, the delicate negotiation that must take place whenever mortals seek to impose their will upon forces that follow rhythms older than civilization itself. He did not fight the river or try to command it, but learned to dance with it, to find within its moods and changes the spaces where human purpose and natural power could work together instead of in opposition. His wife waited for him in Alexandria, her belly swollen with their first child, a son who would grow up hearing stories of a father who had become something more than human, something less than God, something that existed in the mysterious space between memory and possibility. She would stand on the harbor wall each evening, watching the sun set over water that carried no sign of the ship that should have returned months ago, her hand resting on the place where new life stirred restlessly, as if the unborn child could sense that his father's story was transforming into something that ordinary time could not contain. But Kahu did not simply die and sink beneath my waters as mortals do when their time runs out. Instead, he became something else entirely, a guardian spirit of all who travel my currents, all who trust their lives to the ancient covenant between human courage and the natural forces that can either destroy or deliver, depending on the quality of attention and respect they receive. His ship still sails, visible only to those who have learned to see with more than their physical eyes. I have watched it appear to fishermen caught in sudden squalls, its phantom crew working alongside the living to secure nets and bail water and guide foundering boats to safety. I have seen it manifest to young lovers who steal moments of privacy on my banks, its ethereal glow blessing their whispered promises with the authority of something that has transcended ordinary time. Sometimes it comes to comfort the dying, offering passage to whatever lies beyond the reaches of earthly water. The transition from life to death, I have observed, is much like the transition from waking to sleeping, and those who have learned to navigate one often find themselves prepared for the other. The phantom ship serves as a bridge between worlds, carrying souls across waters that exist in no earthly geography yet are more real than any map could show. The boy who sleeps beside me now has seen it too, though he does not yet know that his dreams are visions, that his sleeping mind has access to regions of reality that his waking consciousness cannot yet accept. In his deepest sleep, he sometimes cries out, not in fear, but in recognition, as if encountering someone he has always known but never met. In these dream visions, he walks the phantom deck with feet that make no sound on planks that exist somewhere between wood and light. He feels the phantom wind in his hair, tastes the phantom salt spray on his lips, hears the creak of rigging that responds to forces no living sailor could identify. And always, Kahu's voice speaks words of encouragement that echo across the centuries like waves reaching shore long after the stone that created them has settled to the bottom. Every journey continues. The ghost captain tells him in the language that dreams use when ordinary words are inadequate, even when the destination changes. Especially when the destination changes. The cargo we thought we were carrying proves to be less important than the cargo we did not know we had taken aboard. The port we thought we were seeking was never our true destination. There are other phantom ships as well, each with its own story, its own reason for existing in the eternal present where all voyages continue regardless of their apparent endings. A royal barge that once carried a princess who died of fever the night before her wedding, her beauty preserved forever in the moment between life and legend, her wedding dress transformed into sails that catch wind from the realm where all love stories find their true conclusion. A warship commanded by a general whose name was struck from all official records after he chose loyalty to his defeated pharaoh over accommodation with the conquerors, but whose faithfulness earned him a kind of immortality that no court historian could grant or revoke. His vessel patrols the borders between worlds, defending travelers who venture into the uncertain waters where the possible meets the actual. A simple fishing boat crewed by an old man and his grandson, both drowned when their nets became tangled in my depths during a season when the fish ran deeper than usual and the currents moved with unexpected power. They continue their eternal fishing expedition, casting phantom nets that catch dreams instead of fish, stories instead of silver scales, memories instead of the mundane catch that once fed their bodies but could never satisfy their souls. And sometimes, in the darkest hour before dawn when time becomes fluid and the barriers between past and future grow permeable, I see a ship that has not yet sailed but will someday, a vessel carrying refugees from wars not yet fought, lovers fleeing from kingdoms not yet fallen, children seeking parents they have not yet lost. Time flows differently on these ghostly waters, where phantom vessels sail according to the logic of story rather than the linear progression of history. The boy stirs beside me, his sleeping mind sensing something that his conscious thoughts cannot quite grasp. In his ongoing dream, he finds himself standing on the deck of one of these timeless ships, but he cannot tell whether he is passenger or crew member, whether he is fleeing from something or sailing toward it. The distinction seems less important than the fact of movement itself, the deep satisfaction that comes from being in harmony with forces larger than individual understanding. "Where are we going?" he asks the phantom crew, these sailors who exist in the eternal moment between departure and arrival. But they only smile and point toward the horizon where stars dissolve into the first pale suggestions of dawn. "We are going where all rivers go," they reply with voices that sound like wind through rigging, like water flowing over stones, like the distant call of birds whose migrations connect all seasons in an endless circle. Always toward the sea, but taking whatever time we need to deliver whatever cargo we are truly meant to carry. This is the secret that the phantom ships preserve, that every ending is also a beginning, that every departure contains within itself the seeds of return, that the space between destinations is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence of a different kind. The journey itself becomes the destination when we learn to sail in harmony with currents that know exactly where they are going even when we do not. All rivers lead to the sea, but the sea also sends its waters back to the rivers through the great circulation that connects all moisture, all movement, all the restless traveling that characterizes both water and consciousness. The phantom ships sail forever in this circulation, carrying their eternal cargo of undelivered messages, unrequited loves, unfinished prayers, and unfulfilled dreams to shores that exist in the geography of hope rather than the atlas of ordinary maps. Let yourself drift now on these eternal currents, carried by waters that know no difference between dreaming and waking, between memory and prophecy. Feel yourself aboard one of these timeless vessels, sailing safely through whatever darkness surrounds you toward whatever dawn awaits beyond the horizon of current understanding. The first light of dawn touches the eastern horizon like a whispered promise, and I feel the boy beginning to stir. Not with the jarring awakeness of those who fight against sleep's ending, who cling to unconsciousness like shipwreck survivors clinging to debris, but with the gentle emergence of a flower opening to receive the sun's first blessing, the natural unfolding that comes when rest has accomplished its mysterious work. His breathing changes, becomes less deep and more aware, shifting from the profound rhythms of deepest sleep to the lighter patterns that signal the approach of consciousness. His body moves slightly, finding new comfort against the woven reed mat that has served as his bed through the long night of stories, the accumulated wisdom settling into his bones like silt finding its perfect resting place at the bottom of a quiet pool. But he does not open his eyes immediately. Something in him recognizes that this moment, the sacred space between sleeping and waking, between the world of dreams and the world of daylight tasks and responsibilities, is too precious to be rushed, too delicate to be entered carelessly. He lies still, poised on the threshold between two kinds of consciousness, allowing the transition to unfold according to its own natural timing. I continue speaking, but my voice grows softer now, more whisper than current, more feeling than sound, more presence than words. For I know that he is listening differently than he listened in the depths of night. Then, he heard with his dreaming mind, open and receptive as still water reflecting stars. Now, he hears with his entire being, as if every cell in his young body has become an ear capable of receiving truths that ordinary hearing cannot detect. The quality of my voice adjusts itself to match the growing light, becoming more transparent, more luminous, like water that carries light within itself rather than simply reflecting it from the surface. This is the voice I use for those who are awakening not just from sleep but from the deeper slumber that most humans mistake for waking life. The voice that speaks to consciousness remembering itself, to awareness recognizing its own infinite nature. Little listener, I murmur, my words flowing gentle as the current that barely disturbs the papyrus reeds growing along my banks. The stories I have shared with you tonight are not merely memories preserved in flowing water. They are gifts offered freely, seeds planted in the fertile darkness of your dreaming mind, treasures from the great treasury of experience that belongs to all who learn to hear what water has always been saying. His eyelids flutter like butterfly wings but do not yet open. A small smile touches the corners of his mouth, subtle as the first ripple that spreads across still water when a single drop falls from heaven, suggesting that he is hearing something that pleases him not just mentally but in the deepest chambers of his heart where recognition lives. His hand, which has been resting quietly on the mat beside him throughout the night's long communion, moves almost without conscious direction toward my edge. The movement is natural as breathing, inevitable as the dawn that now paints thin lines of gold across the dark canvas of the sky. Just his fingertips at first, dipping into my shallows where the current is gentlest, where my voice speaks in the softest whispers. The moment of contact sends ripples through both of us, through him, the warm recognition of connection with something vast and patient and eternally present. Through me, the living awareness of one more consciousness that has learned to hear what water speaks to those who remember how to listen. In that simple touch, worlds meet and recognize each other. Through his fingertips, he feels not just the physical sensation of cool water moving over skin, but something infinitely more profound, the direct transmission of the wordless knowing that exists between all expressions of the same source. He feels, in his young bones and flowing blood, the connection that links his small stream of individual life to my vast current, and my current to the infinite ocean toward which all waters flow and from which all waters ultimately come. It is the touch of recognition, the moment when the drop remembers the ocean and the ocean recognizes the drop, when the part knows itself to be whole and the whole reveals itself in the part. No words are needed for this communion. No explanations can contain it. No theology can capture it. It simply is, like water, like breath, like the beating of a heart that has never learned to doubt its own rhythm. You will remember, I tell him, though I know he may never recall the specific words I have spoken or the particular stories I have shared. Memory works differently in the depths where these communications take place, preserving essence rather than details, transmitting understanding rather than information. Not with your mind, which forgets more than it keeps, but with your heart, which preserves everything that truly matters. The kind of remembering I speak of is not the mental retention of facts and narratives, but the deeper recognition that transforms the one who receives it. It is the remembering that happens when someone suddenly knows something they have never learned, when understanding dawns not through education but through awakening, when truth is recognized rather than acquired. And someday, I continue, my voice becoming even softer as the light grows stronger, when you are grown and have children of your own, when your hair is grey and your hands are marked with the accumulated experience of a lifetime spent in service to mysteries larger than individual ambition, you will find yourself drawn to moving water. You will sit beside streams and rivers and listen to their voices, and you will know why. The knowledge I have planted in his sleeping consciousness will grow slowly, like a seed that requires many seasons to reach its full flowering. He will not become a priest or a sage or a keeper of ancient wisdom in any formal sense. He will remain what he has always been, one of the unnamed multitudes who build the world through their daily labor, who preserve what matters through their simple faithfulness to life's essential requirements. But he will carry within himself the awareness that water speaks, that rivers remember, that consciousness flows through all things like the current that connects mountain spring to ocean depth. This knowledge will express itself not through dramatic gestures or proclaimed insights, but through the quality of attention he brings to ordinary moments, the depth of presence he offers to everyday encounters. Now his eyes open. Slowly, peacefully, like pools that have been disturbed by wind finally returning to perfect stillness, reflecting the first stars of evening or, in this case, the first light of morning. But something fundamental has changed in them overnight. Yesterday, they held the simple awareness of a child who knows only the immediate world of tasks and necessities, the basic consciousness required for survival in circumstances that offer little room for wonder. Today, they hold depths that were not there before, not the confusion of one who has been overwhelmed by too much information, but the serene clarity of one who has been reminded of something essential that was always true but temporarily forgotten. There is a quality of recognition in them now, as if he has encountered a face he has always known but never seen, heard a voice he has always recognized but never heard with physical ears. He sits up carefully, respectfully, as if instinctively aware that the space around him has been transformed by the night's vigil into something approaching sacred ground. His movements are deliberate but natural, like someone who has learned to move in harmony with forces larger than individual will, someone who understands that true strength comes not from imposing one's desires upon the world, but from aligning those desires with currents that flow toward destinations worth reaching. The palm trees seem more luminous in the growing light, their fronds moving with the dignified grace of dancers performing ancient ceremonies. The distant hills wear their shadows like royal robes, and even the humble mud brick houses of his village, glimpsed through gaps in the vegetation, seem touched with a dignity they did not possess yesterday, as if the boy's transformation has somehow elevated everything within the radius of his perception. "Thank you," he whispers, and though I cannot be certain whether he speaks to me or to the morning light or to some unnamed presence that encompasses both river and dawn and the mystery that connects all things, I receive his gratitude as I receive all offerings, with the patient grace of one who gives freely without expectation of return. He cups water in his hands, the same hands that will spend the coming day in labor, and drinks slowly, thoughtfully, not because he is thirsty in any ordinary sense, but because he understands now that this simple act is also communion, also prayer, also participation in the great circulation that connects all life to its source and destination. The water he drinks has been rain over distant mountains whose names he will never know, springs bubbling up from underground chambers where darkness and pressure create their own kind of beauty, morning dew on flowers he will never see blooming in meadows he will never visit. It carries their stories, their essence, their blessing. And now it will become part of his story, his essence, his blessing to be passed along to others through ways he cannot imagine. As he prepares to return to his village, to the duties and demands that daylight will inevitably bring, he pauses for one last look across my surface. The sun is higher now, transforming my waters into a ribbon of molten gold that stretches toward horizons he may never reach with his physical body but has already touched with his dreaming consciousness. Somewhere in the reeds, a bird calls once and falls silent, as if offering its own blessing to the morning and the boy and the moment when night's wisdom prepares to meet day's responsibilities. Somewhere else, the wind stirs the palm fronds with a sound like distant applause, celebrating another successful passage from sleeping to waking, another consciousness that has touched the eternal and returned enriched. "I will come back," he promises, and I know with the certainty that flowing water possesses that he will keep this commitment. Tonight, tomorrow night, all the nights of his life until the final night when he makes his ultimate journey to join the ancestors who speak through my current and the stars that guide my course toward the sea. He will bring his children when they are old enough to listen, teach them to sit quietly beside flowing water and remember that they belong to something larger than their individual fears and desires. He will bring their children after that, and the lineage of listeners will continue, each generation adding their own understanding to the accumulated wisdom that flows like water from source to sea and back to source again. For this is how the most important stories survive, not carved in stone monuments that crumble or written on papyrus that turns to dust, but carried in the hearts of those who know how to receive what water offers, passed from one generation to the next like the most precious inheritance, each listener adding something of their own while preserving the essential truth that consciousness flows through all things like the current that connects every drop to the infinite ocean from which it came. The boy walks away across the reed beds, his step lighter than it was yesterday, his shoulders straighter, his head held with the quiet dignity of one who knows he belongs to something vast and patient and eternally present. But part of him remains with me always, as part of me goes with him into the brightening day, the connection established in the depths of night proving stronger than the apparent separation that daylight seems to create. And I continue flowing, as I have always flowed and will always flow, carrying the stories of all who have rested beside my banks, all who have trusted me with their dreams, all who have learned to hear the silent words that water speaks to those who remember how to listen with more than their ears. The story ends, but the river flows on. The night completes its cycle, but the memories it has created join the eternal circulation that connects all stories, all dreams, all the consciousness that moves through the world like water seeking its own level, always finding its way home to the vast embrace that welcomes all travelers, all journeys, all the restless seeking that eventually discovers what was never lost. Sleep now completes its sacred work, like water returning to the sea from which it came. Rest in the knowledge that every night is a journey toward deeper understanding, every dream a destination reached, every awakening a safe arrival at the shore of a new day enriched by the treasures gathered in darkness. The boy disappears into the growing light, but his story continues, carried forward by the same current that brings these words to you who listen now. You who have chosen to trust your own rest to the keeping of ancient voices, patient waters, and the eternal circulation of stories that connects all sleepers, all dreamers, all who know that consciousness flows through the world like the Nile flows through Egypt, endlessly, purposefully, carrying the memory of all it has touched toward a destination vast enough to welcome every story, every dream, every drop of awareness that has ever existed or ever will exist. And in the silence that follows the last word, the river continues its eternal song, carrying you safely through the darkness toward whatever dawn awaits. Our story has come to an end. Now, you're in a place where there are no questions, no movements, only sleep. If you can still hear my voice, you're standing at the threshold. Let the waves carry you to peaceful dreams. Let the stars watch over your rest. Let the night embrace you with gentle darkness. And know that somewhere, in the vast and beautiful cosmos, love continues. Light continues. Beauty continues. Good night. And the gentlest dreams.